Take one.
You're watching the QUESTionaire podcast.
What can they say?
You are checking out the QUESTionaire.
What's your name again?
The QUESTionaire.
Would you like to have questions?
I don't got it. I'm not that guy.
Submit yourself.
Super fun and entertaining.
This is the QUESTionaire.
You still at it? Yeah, we're still at it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the QUESTionaire. We're repping season 3. You know, had to have a quick talk with Larry before we actually started and make sure some things was done, because Jay Clark had to interview Jay Clark, and that's what up. But I am the unknown factor. This is another quest for y'all, right? All right, for today, you just got to put up with me and one other very talented individual. You might be in a race with a little bit of speed. Might be a bit of a ghost at times, up in space. But I swear that planet was something that was spoken of on this show before it ever happened, which is just phenomenal. Captain, yeah, David Pepose, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Man, I just got to dig into this right off the bat. David, the last time you was on, Captain Planet got brought up, right? Were you pitching that already?
Let's see. Remind me the timing of that. Do you remember what the timing was for that?
No. Are you?
That was more than a year ago, though, correct?
It was definitely more than, yes. It was. I can with utter certainty tell you it was more than a year ago.
So I've been pitching Captain Planet all around the comics industry ever since I've been a part of the comics industry. But the job didn't really kind of materialize until last year's San Diego Comic-Con. My publisher for Space Coast, Dynamite Entertainment, they were expanding their deal with Warner Brothers Discovery. And so they had announced that they'd picked up the rights to Captain Planet. And I kind of built a nice head of steam with Space Coast. And so I marched over to my editor, Joe Rybant, and my publisher, Nick Barucci. And I was like, do you have anybody on this book? Because if not, you have to give it to me. And so, I turned in my outline for the book. Actually, it was a year ago this week. So that's the reason why I asked. But yeah, this thing's been a long time coming. You know, it's very rare. I think it's the only other time I've ever really been able to like call my shot in that way was with Moon Knight City of the Dead. But it's very rare to be able to say like, hey, there's a property I really want to write, and that the opportunity kind of avails itself. So it was really nice to like kind of be able to take that story that I had had in my head for so long and finally kind of get it out into the world. And so I'm so thrilled with how the book came together. My artist in the book, Amon Casalos, just did such an incredible job bringing that to life. And so yeah, I couldn't be more happy with how that book turned out and reception to it.
And it's definitely something I feel is needed as far as in the current climate of the world, man. Just more positivity. I won't lie, I'm waiting for the graphic novel. Kind of decided to, with a lot of life events, kind of slim back on what I'm doing floppy-wise and get more graphic novels up. The last year's been really interesting. I don't know if for anybody that goes back and looks at how the show was released, you can tell some things happened, and we'll just leave it at that. I ain't getting. One day I'll release that the after the episode with Locke, where me and him had a whole discussion. But there's part of me that's like, that got really personal. I don't know if I want to. Right, but to my point with Captain Planet, I think it's funny because there are 3 things specifically that have been discussed on this show at different points. And then they ended up happening. That being the first. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's awesome. The second, I'm like, why is Jason Momoa not Lobo? Right? And now Jason Momoa is Lobo, which, thanks for casting him properly finally. I appreciate it, y'all, whoever handled that. Because he should have been. And then the last is I was like, they should never make Caust into a TV show or film or anything. Did you see what they're making as a TV show?
I'm going to guess it's Caust.
Kind of worried.
It'll be hardcore. to say the least.
No, man, that's 10 steps beyond that. You know what I mean? Right? I mean, come on, it is. But what do you do? I mean, it's interesting right now that, David, with you're handling 3 properties that have a history that goes back at least 40 years for each one of them. I mean, in some cases, a good deal more, but it's at least 40 years for all of them, isn't it? I mean, because Captain Planet out of those 3 is the one that
Captain
is the
Planet,
newest.
Captain Planet, I want to say, is like 30-ish years. It came
Okay.
out in 89. So, well, no, I mean, it's still staring down the barrel of 40. And then, yeah, Space Ghost and Speed Racer came out, I believe it was 66 and 67 or 67 and 68.
Yeah.
They came out almost a year apart. So yeah, it's really been a wonderful opportunity to kind of be able to explore these kind of enduring pop culture icons. And it's funny, I mean, I grew up in the 90s, so like Captain Planet I knew because I was watching it as it came out, but Space Ghost and Speed Racer, obviously I'm too young. I was not alive during the heyday of either of those shows. And so, I would catch reruns and the like through like cultural osmosis. And of course I knew about, Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and I watched the Speed Racer movie when it came out. But I think the thing for me is it really kind of freed me in a lot of ways to really be able to kind of explore these properties, but also to kind of add my own twist to them. It's when you're working in sort of big 2 superheroes, I think because these characters are so in the public eye, and that fans have a lot of expectations, that a lot of fans are sort of very laser focused on the continuity of it all. I think sometimes that can box you in a little bit as a writer. I mean, I love continuity. I see it as a great tool, but I think that also means that sometimes there can be a much more narrow interpretation of like what a character is quote unquote allowed to do, just in terms of the reader response. And so, something with like Space Ghost, for example, or Speed Racer or Captain Planet, there's something that's made those properties kind of go the distance and last the test of time. And so for me, it really does feel like it's like pop culture archaeology in a way. It's figuring out just like what the bones are, what makes this thing the thing, and then kind of figuring out ways to sort of accentuate that and ways to kind of dust off those bones and kind of make them sparkle like new. So, I think in a lot of ways, those were characters that I kind of fell in love with. They're characters that I saw the potential, that I saw that like the ingredients were there to do something that I thought would be fun for readers, but also fun for me as a writer, and something that I could kind of put my own personal voice into and my own stamp on. And so seeing the response to all 3 of those books, I think it certainly makes me feel vindicated. I think a lot of people who grew up with these properties, they would like to see how it grew up with them. But I think also by virtue of doing brand new continuity with all 3, it means we kind of get to build that bigger table. It means we get to invite people in who maybe were just like me, who only heard about these characters through pop culture osmosis and want to know what the hubbub is. And so that's been really nice. I feel like we've been able to build kind of a big tent with all 3 of those books to appeal to both like newcomers and diehards alike.
Which one did you put the most research into, or I should say, have to put the most research into before you started? Because those are 3 properties, man. There's a lot there.
Well, I would say out of all of them is probably Speed Racer, and that's for a variety of reasons. I mean, I watched every episode of Space Ghost and every episode of Speed Racer to prepare for those books. And Captain Planet, I rewatched a few kind of key episodes because I already knew it. I grew up with it. But Space Ghost, I think the episodes are shorter, and you don't really need to do a whole lot of like real world research that goes into any of it. So that research was comparatively less intensive than Speed Racer.
Wait, you didn't go back and watch all of Coast to Coast?
No. Well, I didn't do that for a variety of reasons, both because I'd still be watching them at this point, but also Coast to Coast is actually considered a separate license. So I was told in no uncertain terms, like, you can't really do a whole lot that has to do with Coast to Coast. Maybe you can do like a little wink, nod, Easter egg, but that's about as far as you get. So yeah, Speed Racer was trickier because it's 52 episodes, I believe. They're like 22 minutes a pop. And then once you're like watching them and taking notes and all of them, that usually means like at least, I'd say at minimum, it's 3 times the length. So it's, an hour an episode. It's 52 hours of just taking notes. And then you have to learn about racing as a sport. And so like I can't tell you how many racing movies and was really kind of digging into like the mechanics of it all. Because, I wanted to make sure that this thing felt kind of, authentic and felt, and also just you when you're doing a sports book like Speed Racer, you're able to kind of find different avenues, by the more you know about racing, the more you can kind of like spin off of that. And we've got something like that coming in issue 7. It's going to be out in the new year. So yeah, that one was certainly the most intensive. I feel like there was a decent amount of research for Captain Planet as well, not necessarily for the cartoon, but just kind of like figuring out the real world applications of all that and figuring out like what could I draw from in the real world. But I think in terms of sheer research, Speed Racer for sure was, I think, the most intensive out of all the 3 books.
I'll tell you, you made another. I didn't realize, and I guess I should have, that those 3 properties are Warner Brothers.
Yes. No. Speed Racer is actually through Tatsunoko Production.
Oh, yeah.
Speed Racers had kind of like a complicated, convoluted history as far as the rights are concerned. But as far as like the rights that were granted for our comics, we're working with Tatsunoko. But even Space Ghost and Captain Planet, both Warner Brothers properties, they've got interesting pedigrees to them. Space Ghost being like an Alex Toth creation. But also for Captain Planet, that was Ted Turner's baby. And I think for a long time, I never thought I could get my hands on Captain Planet because I knew that Ted Turner was so protective of that property. I had heard that like Captain Planet had its own like separate like office in the general like Warner Brothers like constellation. So yeah, but we've been working directly with the Warner Brothers Discovery team. Megan Logan has sort of been our kind of liaison, and she's been wonderful. I've worked with a number of licensors over the years. I've been very fortunate. And I have to say that Warner Brothers in particular has been the best licensor I've ever worked with. They are so chill. They really, they understand the vision. They really let me take the biggest possible swings. And Tatsunoko has also been wonderful. They really kind of have sort of given us, written us a blank check in terms of like making this thing our own and, making it feel like modern and new and saying like, this can be the comic can be its own thing. And, yeah, they've been wonderful to work with as well.
Well, the thing about I'm going to get to Speed Racer and them licensing that out, but Warner Brothers owns DC.
I think the way that this is all speculation on my part, by the way. I should say all guesswork.
Yeah,
this is all guesswork. They it's above my pay grade. They don't tell me specifics. But I would imagine that my thinking on all this is that, you've seen that like DC has taken stabs at Space Ghost and some of the other Warner properties. They were doing, Future Quest when I kind of cracked my way in the industry. And my thinking, and again, one man's opinion, is that DC has so many other books that they're working on that I think you do hit a certain saturation point where if you try to have Space Ghost in with all these other heroes, he's gonna be kind of like left in the dust a little bit because DC, perfectly understandably, by the way, if they're gonna put it into Batman, they'll put it into Batman, not Space Ghost. Whereas I do think like being able to kind of like license out with another publisher, first off, that's just a little bit of extra revenue on Warner Brothers side. But I think also there's this thought of, a place like Dynamite, for example, they'll throw weight behind a book like Space Ghost. They will treat that like a flagship title. And so I think, Nick Barucci, I think is very smart. And I think that's really kind of helped Dynamite weather kind of the current craziness of the industry, especially, in a increasingly post-Diamond environment, is that he's been able to diversify. And so he's been able to kind of tap into all these different genres and different fan bases and different audiences. And I think, kind of coming on the heels of what Daniel Warren Johnson did on Transformers, I think all these publishers are starting to realize, like, licensed books don't have to just they don't have to be cheap cash grabs. They can be actual, like, artistic statements. They can stand shoulder to shoulder with everything coming out of the big two. And I think that has been like a real boon for a lot of these different publishers. And so I feel very fortunate to kind of have been an early part of that wave. But yeah, it's not something that I ever expected. I certainly never expected to be the cartoon guy, but it's just sort of the way that, like, kind of the projects all kind of came together in a certain time frame. But like I said, it's been a really wonderful experience. All three books have really given me a lot of freedom to explore.
I better get my Brack one shot somewhere. All right, you hear me?
That'd be interesting. I've been very fortunate to actually have correspondence with the real life Brack, Andy Merrill, who's just been a real sweetheart of a man, a true champion of what we've been doing on Space Ghost. I think he's wonderful. And so, never say never. I think it'd be neat if they did anything coast to coast related with Space Ghost down the line. And if it were me, I would be saying it needs to be Andy Merrill.
Oh yeah, no. Honestly, I think I love the Brack show. I probably enjoyed the Brack show more than I did Coast to Coast, but that's neither here nor there. And I digress, man. And since you have very much turned into the animation guy, right? You've got three titles that hold heavy weight in pop culture. I mean, they hold heavy weight, and there's, like you said, there's stories that you can very much push, and with Captain Planet, it's so relevant. What's the next one? What cartoon do you look at? If you could, how about this? If you could cherry pick a cartoon and just be like, I want to do this one. Is there one that you look at now? Because last time it was Captain Planet.
I would love to do something in the Turtles wheelhouse. I grew up the Turtles head, and I love everything that IDW is doing, and so I'm really stoked to see what Gene has planned for his new run on Turtles. Power Rangers would be neat. That's probably as far as like cartoon or cartoon adjacent kind of stuff. Maybe Voltron. Voltron could be interesting. Those are just kind of the ones that immediately spring to mind. There are other licenses as well. James Bond is one I've always really wanted to take a crack at. Those kind of spring to mind to me the most. But that's, I think, the biggest lesson that I've learned in the last few years is that while you sometimes have books like Captain Planet where you actually call your shot, I find that the best books of mine, and then the ones that I've had the most fun kind of digging into, are the ones I never saw coming. Space Ghost, for example, was not at all on my radar. And, I've been literally, before we started, this podcast, like, I'm churning through the next script of that book. I'm hoping to have the issue done over the weekend. That book feels so personal to me and so natural to me. But that came as a complete surprise. Speed Racer, similarly, I did not lobby for that book. What happened was Bad Cave approached me saying, "Would you have any interest in a Speed Racer book?" And immediately I was like, "Yeah, you could do something really cool with that." And then I started lobbying for that book. I think sometimes if you try to I find that you can burn a lot of mental energy trying to say like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Like, I want to do this book. I want to do this book. And I think that's a way to not only set yourself up for heartbreak, but also just like it's mental energy that you could be using for the project right in front of you. And I think also that way, when, if the project does kind of fall into your lap, you'll be operating at sort of your most present amount of talent. Weird way to say it. Rather than sort of being kind of like calcified into like what your level of talent was 10 years ago. And so I do think like, trying to sort of like future cast what your career is going to look like. I've very much learned that the comics industry is not predictable like that. And so all you can do is kind of like take as many swings as you can and just try to get yourself in the right place at the right time.
Okay. All I got to say to all that is, as I said, when we started this particular quest, there's several things that have been spoken of that I feel like got spoken of into existence to a certain degree on this show because they all ended up happening, which is amazing. So I want to do one more, right? Because you said Space Ghost and Speed Racer were two that like you were very surprised about. They both start with S. And then you brought up you'd like to do the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which, yeah, that'd be dope. I mean, it's the Turtles, man. We've had a couple of different people on here who have done some work on the Turtles, and I love the Turtles. That's something I grew up with. And it's the reason my mom said I was violent as a kid. I think that's BS, right? The Turtles were not about just sheer violence. It was so much more depth to it than that. It was about being a good person. Sometimes a bad guy needs kicked in the face. All right, let's face it. That's just the facts of life. But let's go with another one that starts with S. That's a cartoon. Give me some Street Sharks.
Well, IDW just launched Street Sharks. Stephanie Williams. Yeah, Stephanie Williams is writing it. I think the first issue just came out like a few weeks ago. So definitely check that one out. It is funny. I can say this now. It's fine. There was actually a short conversation a few years back about Street Sharks and with a different publisher, and I didn't know enough about the property. I missed it when it came out. I never saw it. And so that's, I think, the one thing that you have to kind of like, when you do take on one of these properties, there's a little bit of a calculus of just like, it doesn't mean that you don't, you might not know the property like the back of your hand. That's totally fine. But I think you need to be able to see some immediate potential, because otherwise, if you're sort of sitting there like trying to figure out what the hook is versus like having, I think, at least a decent idea of what the hook is relatively early on, that's going to be a tough project. And I've had books like that before where like, I didn't really know the hook quite as well. I didn't really know the character quite as well. And those are the books that like I'm a little less happy with compared to like something like Space Ghost, where like I immediately was like, oh, it's a found family story. It's Dr. Grant and Tim and Lex from Jurassic Park. Bingo. Like, so yeah, I think something like Street Sharks, I didn't know the property well enough, and my bandwidth was so tapped out at that point. My schedule was pretty gnarly at that moment. So, but yeah, I think IDW is doing some neat stuff with that book. So I'm very excited to see where that book heads.
Could you put me in touch with Stephanie after this later? David, I'd love to bring her on the show and talk some Street Sharks. I'll be real honest.
Yeah, for sure.
But can I say, in my opinion, the main true value was Street Sharks, because the main thing I remember about the show were the toys. Because, I mean, you put those with your turtles, and it was just a fun time as a kid.
Yeah.
Like shark people, turtle people. I mean, I don't know. I honestly barely remember the show whatsoever, but I know I had the figures.
Those designs.
Yeah,
they were neat design.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think pushes. It is funny that if you look at a lot of the properties that you're working on, or that a lot of the things that are coming out, I think there are a lot of things being done in comics right now that when they were initially done as shows, I think a lot of the marketing behind them had to do with putting out things for kids to buy in the stores. It wasn't so much about a good story. It was about, oh, look at this. It's cool.
It's a
Go buy
commercial for the
toy.
toys.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, it was literally a commercial for the toys.
Yeah.
What do you think about the comic book industry taking on these older shows that were obviously, like I said, more of a commercial for the shows, or I mean for the toys and the accessories and the costumes and everything else, and
Sure.
putting deeper seated stories within them?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a bit of a tradition. I mean, you look back even like the original Star Wars comics, the original Transformers comics, the wasn't ROM supposed to be a toy? Maybe I'm misremembering that. But I do think like, comics by virtue of the medium and by virtue of, its monthly periodicals, you wind up you can build a pretty decent mythology, especially, with the older books. I think now attrition is a thing. And I don't think it's controversial to say that the market has shrunk, the readership has shrunk. And so it's a little trickier to, I think, get a book off the ground long term. And so, I think it's been really nice for the books that I've been working on. Space Ghost and Speed Racer, I was offered long runways on those books. Speed Racer, I think it was a 16 issue runway. And Space Ghost, we started with 13. We've already doubled that with another 12. And I'm hoping we can get even a little bit more after that. So yeah, I think we're sort of seeing that play out again. And you see it also with like Transformers, you see it with, IDW's Turtles relaunch. I think just, you got to fill the space, and so I think that lends itself to, I think, maybe this deeper type of storytelling, because, and don't get me wrong, I mean, there is an approach as well of, and you see it in some books where they're just like, look, it's going to be the next season of whatever show, and we're going to do it exactly like the show was. And I personally, this is one man's opinion, I personally think it's great if you can pull it off. To me, it strikes me as a lose-lose situation, because you're either showing up to the party 20 years late, trying to crib off the original creator's style, and chances are you are not going to be as good as the people who did it for years on end. I think it means that, like, you're kind of just preaching to the choir a little bit. You're not really opening the book up to anybody new. If anything, those people will see it and be like, oh, I need to watch the TV show for this to make sense. I don't have time to do that. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to. I think the idea of making readers have to do homework to read their comics is not great. I think that's probably one reason of many why we are in the position that we're in today. And so that's something I try to avoid. And that's why I like doing kind of the reboots of all these properties, is that way you can kind of put your own stamp on it. You can make it new, and all you got to do is pick up issue 1.
Now, wait, I need you to elaborate a little on what you just said, David, because you think that's why we're in the state that we are. Because I can think with what
I should say one reason of many. There's many.
Oh, well, I mean, fair enough, man. And let's be real honest. If you want to bring up comic book readership, let's spike the minimum wage, and that's how you really increase sales of everything. But that's a whole. I was
going to say the minimum wage, inflation, the whole distribution hoops that you got to jump through, the fact that you got to find a local comic shop. There are plenty of structural hurdles that go into it.
Okay, but we're not going to discuss those.
As far as the people who that all said, of who would be primed to buy a comic versus a video game or or a movie ticket or what have you, I do think that and I talked about this a little bit earlier, is that continuity can be double-edged, and I think sometimes it can be more difficult to jump into a book than not. And so that's stuff that we've been really trying to address in my books. That's why I've been doing the done in 1 and done in 2 approach, is that way, like, oh, you missed a month, it's okay, like, don't worry about it, or also, if you don't like this particular story, that's okay, like, check us out next month, it'll probably be something new. So yeah, I think, trying to make the bar for entry as low as possible, to make it as accessible as possible, I think is something that's like incumbent on every single comics writer to do. And I think it's one of many things that we're not always great at. And so that's something that I've always really tried to focus on in my work.
Well, and see, with what you said, as far as them trying to continue shows, the two things that really come to my mind are the show Farscape and the show Firefly. Because I know they took both of those, and I don't think they would have been easy reads if you hadn't watched at least part of either of those shows. You know what I mean? So it was definitely something that had a prerequisite. The word I'm trying to say, God.
You know what you should like. And I will say, like, because I don't want to paint everybody in an unfair brush. Because there are certain things like Firefly, for example, that makes perfect sense. Like that was like half a season, not even, and like a movie, like
great movie. Great movie. I love that movie.
But like there's not enough like to draw from that you're gonna do a reboot of it. And Farscape, I think you could probably make a similar argument. Although I feel like you could do something in the way, I think a great example of all this is what Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly are doing on their Star Trek books, where it is drawing from all that kind of continuity that, like, if you watched any of the shows, you would get it. But these are kind of brand new jumping on points in that sort of pre-existing universe. And I think that's kind of a way that you can hybridize that approach, where it's sort of, you can still tap into all that continuity if somebody likes it, but also it's kind of fresh that, like, if you've only watched a little, you're good. But I think especially the older properties, something like a Captain Planet, so especially like a Space Ghost or a Speed Racer, something that's been dormant for a long time, I think that becomes very difficult to just say, I'm going to do a continuation of that. And I do think that I've seen some books that have tried it, and I think it's been to their detriment.
We need to restart this whole commercial because people could probably hear Pokemon in the background.
Please check out this amazing promotion that we have prepared with the questionnaire.
I'm the Unknown Factor. This right here is the obscure fragment.
Are watching this show?
Yeah, I'll do editing
with the questionnaire.
So we've edited this awesome commercial to get y'all
90% off.
We are not giving 90% off.
No, I mean 9.
How about 20?
The only thing that you have to do is enter that code that you have right there.
9.
No, 20.
10.
How about 20?
I'm printing your comics today with Studio Comics Press.
Just use this code right here, right here, right here. Look, I put it somewhere. All right, it's probably actually right here, right here, right. It's right under your chin. It says Quest 24.
That code you gotta enter in our website, and then you will get a Women discount of 20% in any of the items or products that we have on the website.
9.
20.
9.
20%.
9.
All right.
9.
He wants to give you 9% off. I, as well as Alfonso over there on Studio Comics, want to give you 20% off.
You can get it right there with this amazing code. Just enter it right here. Yeah, just right there. There.
Use that code over at Studio Comics to get 20% off.
Thank you very much. This is a special one for all our friends of the questionnaire.
Type in Quest 24 when you check out, man. You can figure out the percentage you'll get right then because it'll show in your order.
Yeah,
right?
9% off.
It's 20%.
The Questionnaire, the best current comic book podcast existing around.
So happy to have Studio Comics as our very, very first sponsor. Say Studio Comics!
Studio Comics!
Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and do all the stuff that you have to do.
I'm the Unknown Factor with the Questionnaire. Make sure you check it out.
It seems like a very bad idea to try and continue Space Ghost or Speed Racer, or even Captain Planet for that matter, from where they were when they stopped. That's been a long
time, and I think the thing, maybe a big misconception of things like that is, I think I get that there are purists who look back on these properties and say, I want it to be exactly the tone and exactly the aesthetic that it was in 1967. And my opinion on that is that they were meant to be cool in their era. You know, I think the core directive of any kind of cool pop culture thing is it's got to be popular, it's got to be cool, and so for me, it's always kind of like, okay, take the ingredients, but like, how would you make it in the year 2025? And that I think is taken these books, I think, and has taken them farther than I think a lot of people would have expected of these nostalgia properties. And I think it just kind of shows there's life in them. And not only that, but like, because you can draw so much from them, you know, I think a problem with Big Two continuity is that a lot of fans know it like encyclopedically. And so they're not really reading the books as much as trying to anticipate them. And that becomes a lose-lose, because either they guess correctly where the story's going, and they're like, well, that sucks, that's predictable. Or the story doesn't go where they were expecting, and they're like, well, that sucks, that's not what my story math would say where it's going to go. Whereas I think, you don't know Space Ghost continuity backwards and forwards. You might know Zorak and Brack and Moltar. Maybe you know the Council of Doom. But there's room to be surprised, and I feel this about Speed Racer and Captain Planet as well.
I'm just waiting for Space Ghost to interview somebody in the comic. All right, that's all I'm waiting for, and you won't do it.
People with fists.
And now you told me that it can't be done because it's a different licensing of Coast, which is crazy, but whatever. All right, but I want to know, because you're handling 3 properties that have a lot of history. What one have you gotten the most flack for as far as not keeping it to the universe, maybe going outside what somebody wanted it to be? What caught you the most flack? Which one? Which of the 3?
In terms of like purists, in terms of like continuity, I guess like Space Ghost by a nose, I mean, I will say that I think all 3 of those books, the vast majority of the readers have been really cool about it, and they've really been they've really gotten behind the vision, and really kind of gotten behind like, oh yeah, we're gonna do like a reboot, and we're gonna make it modern and new and cool. I guess on Space Ghost, like I can probably count on like one hand. Like, I'm sure there's a couple of people who are like, why isn't this like the 60s version? This feels too dark. And I completely understand, especially, if you're doing a modern take, a grounded take on something that was sort of so lighthearted and Silver Agey. Of course, there are going to be people who are going to be nervous, like, oh, are you doing the grim and gritty reboot? I wouldn't characterize our run on Space Ghost like that. I don't think our run on Space Ghost is any darker than like any normal issue of Batman. But yeah, I guess we've had a small number of people who are mad that it's not not their Space Ghost, and you can't please everybody. I think for me, it's just been the ratio of how many people have really championed Space Ghost and really loved Space Ghost and have really been behind it for now a very long tail. I mean, we're 17 issues in at this point, and more to come. So yeah, I that one I don't let it get me down. I feel like,
oh no, yeah, don't
I feel like for these dormant properties, I think the fans really do give you a lot more latitude, and I think it's because they haven't been in the public eye in the way that, say, Moon Knight is an example, where I loved writing Moon Knight City of the Dead, but there were certainly certain fans out there who were mad about my take on Mark versus what they saw for Jed McKay. And I don't think the timing particularly did me any favors, because they had the death of Moon Knight coming, and everyone thought that I was gunning for Jed's job, and I couldn't tell them, no, Jed's got plans, Jed's not going anywhere. So I think that probably had a few knives sharpened as well. But what the latitude I was given in terms of characterization for Mark, even though I thought it made perfect sense given the character and who he was, it was much less than something I would have for like Space Ghost or Speed Racer or Captain Planet, where people seem to be pretty cool about what we've been doing thus far.
Now, seem kind of surprised, and again, I'm waiting for the graphic to drop for Captain Planet before I read it. And I'm sorry, I hate reading digitally, David. I despise it, and the fact that I have a stack of comics right here and over there that are physical that I haven't read makes it to where I'm not reading digitally because I have actual comics I can read. So
I get it.
I'm just like, because look, all I'm saying is I could go read it for one, because David, you're awesome, but either that or I just need a really big tablet. I'd be cool with that. What I'm really waiting for Digital Ages is making it to where like I can bring it up like Tony Stark style and just have it in front of me and just do this.
The hologram, 360 view.
Yeah, and like mess with the transparency to make it to where it's a little transparent or not transparent at all, depending on my circumstance. Like, then I'd be down to read digitally. We ain't there yet, but that's neither here nor there. Right. But with Captain Planet, man, I feel like that's one, depending on how you played it, you could upset a lot of people.
Yeah, I feel like we were actually, I think we kind of came out of that book pretty unscathed. I will say the thing that I actually really liked the most about that book is there were a lot of people who were really excited for that book. I think they understood. We announced the book. It was the day after the inauguration, so everybody was mad. And so announcing Captain Planet the day after, the response was overwhelming. I think it's probably the most buzz I've ever gotten for a book announcement, like ever. People were really excited. However, there were, of course, members of the more conservative leaning that were less thrilled, with the book, saying like, oh, Captain Planet, he's so woke. And I was like, yeah, I mean, he kind of was, like, like even before the term was like invented.
No. I have to stop you right there, David, because it was before the term was turned into what it wasn't, because it existed long before Captain Planet did. The term woke existed. It was hijacked for a reason, because woke it's sorry, continue. I just had to make that point because
I should say popularized.
But it's not. It's not that, man. It was hijacked for complete different purposes besides what it actually is supposed to be. The term woke.
I should say, like, I don't mean that pejoratively in the slightest. I feel like that's the ideals of what Captain Planet stands for. It's supposed to be this diverse, multicultural cast, and it's supposed to be sort of showing not just fighting against climate change and environmental disaster, but also kind of like the unchecked, corrupt billionaires and capitalists that are fueling all of this. I think that Captain Planet, I know it's seen as a product of its time, but it was meant to be reflective of the world outside its window in 1989. So the thing I really liked, actually, though, having kind of written the book, because for me, my thinking was, I want to kind of do the work. I want to make sure that like I build these characters up, that I make them as three-dimensional as possible, that I sort of kind of let the real world kind of inform their characterization and their context. And so, I did more kind of real world research on Captain Planet than even rewatching the show. And the thing that I was really happy with is that not only did we have a lot of people who just enjoyed the book, for what the story was, and there were plenty of people who share my politics who enjoyed the book, but then I saw even some of the more conservative voices out there, the ones who did cover us. You could tell that it was sort of a begrudging, like, yeah, it is pretty good. And they were, they weren't effusive. I would not expect them to be. But the fact that like I was kind of expecting like just some full on rants, and the fact that like beyond sort of the initial like trying to outrage click farm for hits during our announcement. We only got one. We did have one guy do like a 20-minute YouTube video where he was like big mad that I made Elon Musk our villain. And it took him 4 issues to figure it out. But beyond that, the response to that book was actually pretty measured, and people seem to like it. So no complaints there. I think we mission accomplished as far as that book is concerned.
And look, and that's in all sincerity in the 3 that you're working on right now with that's the one that I would expect, just in the climate that we are currently living in this country, to elicit a visceral response from people that probably wouldn't even read the book. They're just upset that you're doing it. And I think that's even funnier because it's like, you ever watch the cartoon? Like, did you watch the cartoon? Because
that was my thought. There was a guy who asked if Captain Planet was getting a quote woke makeover, and I was like dying laughing because I was like, man, did you not watch the cartoon? Like what do you think this thing is? Like, so yeah, no, I think it was one of those things that honestly, I was expecting more people to be angry about it too, but actually people were pretty pleasant about that book. I have no complaints.
It's not woke, it's fair and balanced, unlike our government. Wait, what did I say? Sorry. Yeah, I'm glad that you got a positive response from that though, because I feel like that's a book that could have a great impact, and it should, especially like I said, with the just current situation.
That was a tricky book in that there were things that I was writing last year, and then seeing the book coming out, it was reflecting headlines that I was not expecting. And it was just, that's just sort of what happens in a comic book timeline, is that, you're writing these things months in advance. And particularly, the only regret I have about Captain Planet, and this is not a knock on my publisher whatsoever, but it was the release schedule, in that our first issue came out and then everything happened with Diamond. And so there was a big delay between issues 1 and 2. And then to kind of get the publishing schedule back on track, the rest of the issues were fast tracked. And so that's stuff that's out of your control. I mean, that's something you learn very quickly in comics, is that it's a contact sport. If you can't take a hit, you better choose a different profession. But I do wish that we had a little bit more of a normal schedule with that, because then I think we could have built even more momentum and even more word of mouth, rather than sort of having a more bi-weekly approach with that book. But yeah, I mean, I think, I feel very good with what we did. We may very well revisit that series. That became kind of a scheduling thing. Amon Gonzalez had other work that he had to pick up, and I didn't want to work on the book without him. And also, frankly, Space Ghost and Speed Racer are often very tight deadlines for those books, so I didn't mind kind of like building in a little more cushion to get ahead of those. But yeah, never say never. It was a really fun series. I'm very proud of how it came together.
Yeah, because I feel like that's a lot of things you could touch on, real world incidents that have happened, and it's one of those I feel like you would have to balance more carefully to make sure you didn't get bit inappropriately, ostensibly. Where with Speed Racer and Space Ghost, I'm sure you could do things that would make people mad because.
But those are continuity things, not political things, and I get exactly what you're saying. But yeah, it was one of those things that like we tried to be really thoughtful with our approach on Captain Planet, to make it, not just an action book, although it is an action book for sure. I think that's the business that we're in, but also, being reflective of like, how do we make the pursuit of sort of this environmental conservation, how do we make that immediate? How do we kind of make those stakes feel personal? And I live in Los Angeles. We had the wildfires. I was in New York during Hurricane Sandy. I was living there. climate change is not hypothetical in the way that it was in 1989. It's a disaster movie that we're all extras in. And so that was sort of, I think by doing that and by sort of being able to look at our villain, Lucian Plunder, as sort of, this corrupt billionaire who's like, any natural resource belongs to me to consolidate my own power. And of course, that turns him into, I think, an even bigger monster of his own making. I know it's not subtle, but reality is not subtle right now. And I think the allegory kind of wrote itself on that book. And I think it speaks to how forward-thinking Ted Turner and Barbara Pyle were making that the original Captain Planet. They knew what was up. I think the rest of the world wasn't quite ready for it. I think if you release Captain Planet today, it would be like subversive to the point of like congressional hearings. But I think they think they had their finger on the pulse. I think just the world wasn't ready. Now the world's ready.
So, from what I just heard, that essentially means if he could really blow up Captain Planet and get it to where it was just like a monthly comic, every month you're going to end up in a congressional hearing?
No, because I think the difference being is that it's the target audience, and it's also the size of the audience. I think we're doing these comics for adults, and that's why we're able to kind of shift the tone a little bit, why we're able to do a little bit more sophisticated storytelling. I think if you release Captain Planet to a kids audience in the year 2025, if it had just come out, like in the year 2025, for that level of viewers, that number of viewers, I think there'd probably be some sort of political, like something going on in Washington, D.C. Somebody in the White House would be extremely mad that something like that existed, and I'm sure it would be trying to threaten to take away like Ted Turner's like license or whatever.
You really think that?
Yeah, I mean, you see what kind of like weird, dumb stuff that the White House complains about on TV today. Okay. So I wouldn't be surprised.
In all frankness, in that, and the last year of my life on a personal level was really, 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 really screwy.
Sure.
And so I kind of had to tune the world out to make sure my I had to tune the world out so my world was okay, because I didn't have time for this, because I had to deal with this, because things got interesting, and I'll just leave it at that. Maybe one day I'll release that conversation me and Locke had, and people will be like, oh my god, Locke just said he'd rather have that heart attack than deal with it. And yeah, he did. So apparently a heart attack was less than what I dealt with, so we'll just put that out there. But every once in a while I'll tune in and I'll see something. Or I'll just, because I'm not on social media much, or I'll get on for a minute and I'll see something, and my brain goes, what? Wait a second. I can't deal with this right now. And I just go the other way, and I go back to, I make sure my world and everything and my boy and all that's good, because that's what I have to focus on in this moment, man. But yeah, every once in a while I tune in and I see some things, David, that frankly bloody well hurt my head. And yeah, just to hear you think that would cause a congressional hearing.
Maybe congressional hearings overstating it, but we would certainly. I mean, you see what's happened with with Colbert, and you see that like when you see the president of the United States complaining about Seth Meyers on the internet, like yeah, I mean we're living in some weird times when it comes to anything considered left-leaning popular culture, and it's just sort of the more you try to kind of. Well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say the more you try to strangle it, the more that people do it. But, I mean, you see everything going on with like Paramount's ownership, which is very right-leaning, and sort of their aspirations for the greater pop culture scene, whether it's buying Warner Brothers, whether it's sort of the general tenor of what they're trying to do with their own programming. I don't know. I mean, I think we are kind of living in a certain moment in history, and that's why I think it's incumbent on us to kind of keep reinforcing messages of inclusion and tolerance and diversity and equity, because if we're silent, then I don't know what it means for our culture. I don't know what it means for marginalized people everywhere. Anyway, I'm going in kind of a rabbit hole there, but yeah, I mean, I think something like Captain Planet, if it was released to children today, would be certainly a political flashpoint, no doubt about it.
That's an intriguing thought, man. And not like I don't know. It's interesting to realize that. And I mean, I don't know. I guess there are kids' cartoons that cause crap like this anymore. I don't know. But like you said, the president complained. Like he said something about Seth Meyers. What's Seth Meyers? I don't even care. I don't even care why he's complaining about Seth Meyers. I don't even want to know. Because the point of this, and the thing I want everybody out there that watches this show to understand is go read. Because it's important to read. It's important to read from a number of different creators. It's important to consume those stories from as many different places as you can, because it will make you empathetic. It will make you understand more where other people are coming from. And I think the way that like look, get off TikTok. And if you're on TikTok watching the questionnaire and I said this, that's hilarious. I want to point out, firstly, to me, because I just told you to get off it and go read a book, right? That's why I bring on the authors and the writers and the artists that I do on this show, is because I hope you hear something from them that makes you want to go and pick that up and read it for yourself and experience it for yourself, because I think that's important. And I think people don't understand, and I actually, funnily enough, I seen a reel about this today. I watch reels occasionally, and then I catch myself like swiping, and I'm like, son of a! And it's one of the few moments I almost throw my phone. I don't throw my phone, but like when I catch myself doing that, I kind of want to throw my phone, because I'm like, I'm getting caught in it, and I don't want to. But it was about the fact that people are watching, reels and stories and this and that, and it's look, it's bad parenting. All right, it is, when you're exposing your kid to stories that are 15 seconds to 3 minutes long. All it's doing is giving a short dopamine hit. Watch a film, read a book, and it will teach them a greater appreciation for the ability, or for the need to be able to accomplish something, to really get a really good feeling. You know what I mean? Like I'm currently reading My Son Bone, and we're on volume 8. And to watch his reactions at certain things within that story that happen, it's phenomenal, And I would far rather see that than look at the funny cat video. Hey, that's funny. It was cool. Whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, the depth I think was missed.
I mean, I could have a whole seminar on sort of what I think about like kind of the ongoing trends in terms of like how media has been atomized and how it's been sort of chopped up and shortened into 60-second kind of consumption, and it also speaks to just I think growing anxiety and depression and attention shrinking by the minute and overstimulation. But yeah, I mean I think that's the great thing about books in general, is that I do find them very meditative. I think you have to slow down. Even comics, you still need to like actually read them and take the time, even if they are is very stimulating. But I think the books, when done right, I think they are kind of a window into empathy. It makes you put yourself in somebody else's shoes. It makes you kind of follow their emotions and their who they are as a character. And I think that's something that our society is grappling with right now. I think there's a lot of bad stuff going on, and I think there's a lot of people turning a blind eye to that. saying, not even saying I've got mine. I think worrying about just how do I keep my head above water. And I think, the moment we kind of forget that, about our neighbors, the moment we forget about our neighbors' humanity, is the moment that our society slides into a bad, dark, dangerous place. And so I don't think we're curing cancer here by any means, but I do think that like reading and empathy, I think, go hand in hand. And so that's something I'm very proud of to be a part of. And yeah, I think, it's something that I try to inject in my work wherever I can.
And I think you're totally right, man. And I think it's funny too, because I know there are points where I've read things and it, especially with the current situation I went through, the greatest example I can think of is like Guilt Train. And reading that story specifically, I related to it greatly. We're gonna have Olivia Briggs coming on again here pretty soon too, for y'all out there. But it's moments like that where reading a story that's told from a perspective that's not yours, but you find relatable. I think people fail to realize how many times they'll run across something like that, where it'll be somebody from a completely different background or a completely different place.
Sure.
And read that. And yeah, read for everyone out there. Just read. There is so much to read. There's no reason not to read. I mean, there's no reason at all not to read. I don't understand people that don't. And look, I'll be honest, I don't read as much as I like to, but between a single father juggling life and doing the show,
Sure.
and like sometimes there are days where like I wish I could just be like, look, I'm done and I'm gonna go read. But
Yeah.
I can't do that for a number of reasons, because I want to make sure that people hear from these great creators that we've had on the show, like yourself, David, and hopefully look into it. But it's definitely a weird balance. And I think it's the fact of those videos they kill empathy. Where reading increases it, I think those videos and those short reels will kill empathy for your neighbor, because you're watching, because some of those videos are like, oh my gosh, look at that guy wrecked terribly. That was really funny. Ha 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 ha. How many of those videos are there on the internet? Because I mean, it's jackass in 60-second segments, but maybe someone died,
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it's I think it's all reflective of, I mean, the pop culture kind of influences the culture, and then the culture influences the pop culture, and it's a snake eating its own tail.
So this is I can't wait. I want to say Steve-O and what's the main dude? I can't remember his name right now.
Johnny Knoxville?
It's Johnny Knoxville and Steve-O's fault. That's what I'm going with. Right there. The current state of society is Johnny Knoxville and Steve-O's fault. Because if they wouldn't have had such success.
I always say that it's Survivor and South Park. Those are the two. If I could have a time machine and erase two shows from history, it would be those. I think those shows have contributed in irrevocable ways to where we're at politically, where we're at culturally, and none of it good. So that's my unvarnished 2 cents on pop culture. Is I blame Survivor and South Park for quite a bit.
Okay, now I understand Survivor. I do. Why South Park?
South Park pioneered sort of all this ironic racism, ironic anti-Semitism, ironic homophobia. And it was one of those things that I grew up in the heyday of South Park. I was the perfect target audience for it. And, it was like a little 10-year-old edgelord, which most 10-year-old boys are. Of course it feels like subversive, and it feels transgressive, and you're saying the naughty things, but I think it really kind of, we've clearly crossed a threshold where it's not really ironic anymore. That a lot of people, instead of sort of giving themselves permission to just be outright, racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic. And I think South Park kind of opened the gates for a lot of that. This sort of like the coarsening of culture, this sort of permission to be mean to each other. And it's not to say that that doesn't come from other vectors, but I think South Park really mainstreamed this in a very terrible way. And I sound like an old boomer saying that, but like I genuinely, I know that they're like taking shots at the White House right now, but I do feel like it's way too little, way too late. I think the damage has already long been done, and I do lay quite a bit of it at their feet.
See, that's intriguing because when you were saying that, I thought, stand-ups have been doing things like that.
But I think the difference is that no stand-up has the reach of a South Park. Or I should say very few of them, and certainly not with that kind of material. And so that's where it's like, and I get it, like, being transgressive, if you can do it long term enough and you can do it in a number of different ways, it can catch on. But I think in terms of the ratio of like transgressiveness to like having any sort of like sweeter redemptive human qualities, Simpsons has an amazing balance for that. King of the Hill, particularly the new reboot, I think is a wonderful, like, just has a nice beating human heart to it. Even Family Guy does not quite push the boundaries in the way that South Park did. So anyway, I did not expect to be going on a rant about South Park on a Friday night, but
hey man, you're the one that brought it up. But can I say you missed, in my opinion, because like I said, I agree with Survivor, man. I can't, like, there's no part of that I can, like, I completely and totally understand and see where you're coming with that one as far as what it did with reality TV and everybody smearing everybody and it just worsened everything. Really, though, you could take it back to Road Rules and Real World if you really, really wanted to get to the base of it, because that was pre-Survivor, and I think that was a precursor. And if those two hadn't been successful, Survivor never would have happened. But you left out Futurama, which is great. Oh
yeah, Futurama is wonderful. Yeah.
It is like,
and good
creme de la creme, man. I'm so glad they brought it back. You know what I mean? And I think it makes great points, like you have with your works, man. So for everybody out there, check it out. We're not going to get any more political. We got political enough. And one day, if you there's a new website we got set up. It might be already set up now by the time it's going. I don't know. It might not. We tried it. Whatever. Look, I'm going to cause Larry editing problems because I'm tired and going to start dropping F-bombs. So we're going to end, before I start doing that terribly, because I will. David, I really will sometimes. Man, I want you all to know there's links in the description. Or go to your local comic shop, right? You can pick up Space Ghost Volume 1 right now is out, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Space Ghost Volume 1 is out. When's the Captain Planet graphic dropping?
I don't know the date yet for that one. I know Dynamite just jumped to Simon & Schuster, and I know they need at least 6 months of runway for just to kind of get the books out and, let the booksellers know. So I imagine that'll be out sometime in hopefully early 2026. Speed Racer, I know the first trade comes out in February, but issues 1 through 4 are out right now. Captain Planet issues 1 through 6 are out, and Space Ghost, we've got all of Volume 1 and 4 issues deep in Volume 2.
So go to the local comic book store. Tell him you want something by David Pepose. Don't get his last name wrong. People do it often enough, right? I mean, but if you do, if you're buying his books, I really, really, really.
That's my cross to bear.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's some. I got a last name Clark. If you're into comics and you can't pronounce my last name, you must really, really hate Superman, and that's what that boils down to. You know what I mean? Right. So if you've enjoyed it, like I said, go to your local comic shop, click the links in the description. You can find his books. Now, if for some reason you haven't enjoyed this interview, Like, and you hung around this whole time. Apparently, you just was like, I don't like this leftist conversation. And I'd be like, firstly, I'm not left. I'm not right. I walk a line that I don't bloody well know how I do it, right? But just walk a different line and go over that way and like make a rude comment that I don't care about, I guess, right? Besides that, I just want you all to do 3 things, right? 1, always give it that thumbs up. 2, always get your comic on. And you know what? I'm gonna add another one though, right? Because check it. Well, yeah, believe in yourself and everyone else. That's the only way we'll continue the right way. Besides that, have a good night, y'all.
Thanks so much for hopping on board and listening to the questionnaire.
Keep a listen out to these crazy guys.
The questionnaire.
I missed something.
Like and subscribe.
You're drunk. Go home.
Thanks for checking out the questionnaire.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.